Be strong.
The sound of horse hooves rang out, the horseshoes collided with the ground, creating a familiar clicking sound. The straight back of a man appeared, and just by looking at the clothes on his body, one could judge that he was a person with an unusual status. Appearing was Li Han with an irresistible handsomeness. He rode a horse, closed his eyes and let out a sigh. Next to him there was another person. He suddenly pointed forward to inform Li Han that he was almost there, so he also paid attention forward. In front of them was a magnificent castle in the middle of a rich green mountain forest. They were walking towards the best magic academy in the empire, Einrogard. An elderly man named Alrolong was next to Li Han. He was extremely moved, not thinking that a useless old knight like him would have the opportunity to help a young master like him. Alrolong kept admiring the fact that Li Han had become strong and was enrolled at Einrogard, but he was silent, just looking straight ahead. In Li Han's mind is helplessness because no matter what, he cannot escape school, even in this life. The schoolyard was filled with the chatter and laughter of graduating students, everyone holding bouquets of flowers and talking excitedly. At this time, Li Han of the real world was standing in the schoolyard holding flowers. Another friend ran to hug his neck. He smiled and congratulated him on graduating. He couldn't hide his joy because he had graduated, was liberated and survived before the professors and teachers in the school. Li Han recalls images of when he was a student in the past, when the professor wanted to invite him to join the climbing club but he found an excuse to refuse. Or when he appeared with a haggard face, the professor still gave him a thick stack of documents, making it impossible for a student like Li Han to refuse. Or long days in the lab with panda eyes, sadly scraping kimbap in boredom. Those horrifying memories flashed through his mind. The other friend still shivered and admired that horror but still lamented that having Li Han alone was excellent. He seemed indifferent. The two boys walked home together. Li Han denied that he was excellent because he thought that what he did was just his best effort, causing his friend to only laugh helplessly because he saw that he did not understand the meaning. Yours. His friend took off his graduation cap and asked him why he didn't choose to continue studying because he thought this school lifestyle was suitable for him. Li Han was scared of his friend's thoughts. He let out a breath and answered his friend attentively, making it clear that he would no longer go to school, because he had tried his best, he wouldn't care anymore. Li Han couldn't even tell from afar, "There's a truck coming." His face darkened. He made up his mind that from now on he would live for himself and never study again. The truck in the distance was getting closer and closer, and for some reason the driver's steering wheel was a little wobbly and uncontrollable. The driver's face changed color. He was panicked when the brake did not work and did not respond to his control. Li Han was about to cross the street when he was surprised by the car rushing towards him, and the driver in the car tried to shout a warning to him. The car's lights were bright, the horn was blaring and a giant truck was in front of him, but why was his whole body frozen motionless at this moment, only able to stand still in front of the dangerous vehicle? So whatever happens must happen. The unfortunate thing has happened. Now all the good knowledge has finally become a pile of waste paper. He thought it was the end, but he unexpectedly opened his eyes and saw tiny hands like those of a child. Only then did he realize that he had been reincarnated and remembered everything. The original memories of his previous life were still there, and now he was a child named Li Han Wardanas. The third son of the Wardanas clan, the empire's leading magic family. Li Han was surprised that he had reincarnated, but the strange thing was that he had reincarnated into another world, becoming a noble and the son of the family, noble clan. Li Han suddenly seemed to understand something, tears welling up in his eyes. He happily thought that God was merciful to him and rewarded him with relaxation after the hard work of studying at graduate school. But unfortunately you were wrong. The first rule of the Wardanas family is that the eldest son will inherit everything. Li Han was a bit worried about it because he was the third son. Obviously it would not be his turn to inherit the family. Li Han seemed to understand. He was a bit dissatisfied that except for the eldest son, everyone else had to decide their own future path. Time passed, the sound of wooden swords clashing against each other. Li Han was now a bit older. He and Alrolong practiced swordsmanship together. He was surprised that Li Han wanted to learn swordsmanship from him, and Li Han simply did it out of convenience and he had nothing to do. After all, his clan would support anything Li Han wanted to learn. The two of them practiced wooden swords while chatting. Alrolong asked Li Han if he wanted to follow the path of Kendo, but Li Han refused. He affirmed that he would become a magician because that was the most stable path. Alrolong calmed down a bit after hearing his steady answer, making Li Han feel a bit guilty because he thought his previous answer was a bit unambitious. But he didn't expect Einrogard to directly hug him and admire his intelligence. This made Li Han a bit surprised and looked at him with wide eyes. Einrogard believes that noble children are mostly delusional, and few can make a realistic plan for the future like him. He didn't know that the child in front of him was a graduate student, so the reality was of course something that didn't need to be discussed. From the Knight Corps to the Adventurer Guild to even the royal family, a good magician will always be welcomed. And of course the place that can train those talented characters can only be the best magic academy in the Einrogard Empire. Returning to the reality of adult Li Han, he led the horse and looked at the academy castle, telling himself to endure a little more suffering for the upcoming study period. Einrogard thought that he was wondering in his heart and encouraged him that he would do well because the homeowner had also praised his talent. Li Han just laughed at those words of encouragement and denied it because the homeowner wouldn't even let him practice magic because it was dangerous for children. Hearing that, Einrogard could only be confused and affirmed that what he just said was true, real. The two of them walked a short distance when Einrogard stopped. He could not continue because neither the escort nor the person could enter from here. Li Han did not bother too much to go first himself. Behind him at this moment came the sound of a carriage. It was a carriage with quite a large area, and it looked a bit ostentatious. Except for him, almost all the other nobles came in carriages, and also brought servants. Everyone shouted their positions to force everyone to get out of the way. Li Han could not help but exclaim that this place was too many people. He thought that summoning the musketeers was a bit too much. There were even many servants around. He knew that Einrogard was supposed to be a place where one had to enter on one's own, but perhaps there were still those who disobeyed. Suddenly there was a mumble next to him shouting that everything was wrong. Li Han turned his head to look and discovered that the guy standing next to him kept staring at his hand and trembling, his face a bit unsightly. Li Han couldn't help but ask if the other guy was okay. Hearing the question, he just frowned and clenched his teeth, admitting that he couldn't sleep without the servant. Li Han also didn't know what attitude to express towards this statement. His face was also a bit grumpy with it. The other guy didn't even know what he meant but just rushed at Li Han, saying that the servant was like his hands and feet, that not allowing him to bring the servant was the same as removing his hands and feet. Li Han's smile stiffened, his mouth in agreement, but in my heart I felt disdain. That idiot actually aggressively approached the person standing guard near the gate. He said he wanted to personally use his last name to protest against allowing slaves to study in the same school. Li Han did not stop him. He was only curious to see if the other person would answer. What did that idiot say? The person standing at the gate directly held his wand and cast a spell at the idiot standing in front of him. Immediately, the other guy suddenly became unconscious, repeating the words "I'm sorry" over and over again. Li Han was startled to realize that it was mind control magic. Li Han felt a bit confused. He didn't expect them to dare to use magic on the nobles without thinking. He wondered if those rumors were true. Rumor has it that there are many monsters here and if you die you will be buried in the mountain behind. Suddenly the academy gate slowly opened, a terrible energy emitted. A mysterious voice came from behind the door, welcoming them to Einrogard, calling them unfriendly and stubborn. Li Han couldn't help but frown. He used his hand to block in front of his face, feeling that the magic power radiated was too scary and overwhelming. He recognized the person who spoke loudly as the rumored principal of the academy. Li Han quietly observed everyone around him. He realized that they were all frozen under this pressure. The principal's voice continued to resound. He thought he had warned him not to go alone. Then that terrible magic power once again emitted so strongly that everyone couldn't help but be on guard, scared. He boasted that he would force those who did not want to obey him, and he proved it immediately by using an invisible suction force, sweeping away all furniture and even flying servants, up into the air, causing the nobles to scream and scream because they couldn't stand the lack of servants or having their clothes blown away. The old principal looked at the group of stupid nobles standing still in place and couldn't help but mock them for not moving but just standing there like idiots. He then urged them all to enter. Li Han walked through the door in bewilderment. A skull hovered over the academy. It turned out that everything that had happened just now was because of it, or in other words, this skull was the principal of the academy. He shouted and urged everyone to come in. The academy door gradually closed. That was the first day that Li Han came to Einrogard Academy, and he had a bad feeling about this. The students were now walking together in the hallways of the school, talking loudly about being called an ironhead by the skull-headed principal, even though he was the successor to the earl position. Anyway, Li Han was walking away when a voice came from behind him, asking if he was Li Han of the Wardanas family. That voice made him turn his head back to look. It turned out that the person who had just started talking was a girl. She introduced herself as Yoner Maken, a member of the Maken family, a lineage of magicians. Li Han wasn't too interested, just greeted back and asked if she had anything to do. Yoner said His Highness was looking for him. This sentence caught Li Han's attention a bit. Over there was a boy with blonde hair waving at him. Perhaps it was his royal prince. Li Han suddenly remembered that Einrogard was an ideal place to learn and make friends. The other prince looked at Li Han and smiled awkwardly. Li Han looked at him, not too happy. On the contrary, he felt that the title of His Highness was a bit too exaggerated because after all, His Highness the King had more than 100 children. Because even in the royal family, people only care about the eldest child, and the king can completely ignore his other children, so it's even more difficult for them. And they had to live in a place full of children of such large families. Even though they were royal, they were considered inferior to the Maken and Wardeness families, so Li Han wondered why this Yoner girl became friends with that foolish highness. While he was busy thinking, Yoner asked if he was going. Li Han noticed that there were people around her who were whispering why she had to help an unknown little highness. However, in reality, Li Han thought it was better to be friends than enemies, so he shook Yoner's hand and agreed. Yoner smiled as beautiful as a flower. She thanked him because he was the first to accept. This sentence made him freeze and sweat began to flow. Li Han helplessly scratched his head, starting to regret his decision a bit, while Yoner and His Highness talked and laughed happily together. His Highness's name was Gai Nandu. He was the 97th prince. There were rumors that he was the 101st prince, but he insisted that he was the 97th child. And obviously because he didn't want to be behind the 100th, the three of them stood together and started chatting. Li Han was still lost in thought when Gai Nandu asked him why he didn't hear what he said, causing Li Han to apologize and ask again. Gai Nandu looked frustrated and said that someone refused his offer. Li Han felt that this yellow-haired guy was indeed quite childish. Li Han could only say consolation that perhaps the other person did not know Gai Nandu's status as a tycoon, but he was indifferent to this new term. Li Han further commented that he was not only childish but also stupid, then he explained the word tycoon. Hearing that, the kid felt proud and thought that was the right word to describe him. But Gai Nandu's anger did not calm down. He was upset because the other guy refused him to talk to Adenard. His eyes turned to the crowd of about 7 or 8 people, all of whom were from high-ranking families with no ordinary status. The Adenard that Gai Nandu mentioned was the 44th princess, or somewhere close to it. Li Han felt that Adenard had the aura of a noble as expected and that people would naturally associate with someone like her, not like Gai Nandu. Gai Nandu told Li Han to take care of Adenard because he had a big body, but Li Han of course didn't care, not forgetting to sarcastically say that a tycoon would not bully others. Gai Nandu pouted and said that he did not mean to bully but to punish, but before he could finish his words, Li Han rejected him. Gai Nandu asked what he should do. Li Han said he should be generous and forgive, but if he doesn't want to, Li Han suggested that he could challenge them directly. Gai Nandu's hair stood on end when he heard that. He shyly said there was no need to make a big deal out of it because he was a tycoon, so he would generously ignore it. Hearing that, Li Han immediately patted his head and praised him for being good. Yoner from afar saw this whole scene. She opened her mouth to praise Li Han for being great. Because Li Han can control Gai Nandu's stubbornness, even if Yoner is a relative, he has to give up. Li Han is humbled by her praise. Li Han then learned that the two were relatives, but he wondered why she had to spend so much time taking care of Gai Nandu. She sighed and was about to answer. Suddenly a blue light appeared in the air. A giant skull appeared again. He asked if everyone was talking happily, not forgetting to add the phrase Ironheads. A person pointed at him and said loudly that it was the skull that appeared at the gate. That skull was a lich, an entity that was the result of a magician willing to pay the price in exchange for immortal life. Li Han couldn't believe that an academy principal was a lich. He said that he had a question for everyone about why he called them Ironheads. Adenard raised his hand and answered that the reason was that the symbol of this class's students was steel. He recognized this as the correct answer and gave her house 10 points, making Adenard surprised and a little happy to ask if there were points for stars here. But in response, he laughed at him because there was no such scoring system. He sarcastically said that if you want to become a magician, you should distinguish between real and fake. He said the symbol of this course was indeed steel, a material that could change depending on how it was made, a precious thing with many uses, a perfect material for new students. After listening, everyone was amazed at what he said. But the lich laughed loudly and pointed at them and said that they had been deceived. The simple reason for the symbol was because their heads were empty. All the students were stunned by his answer. Li Han observed everyone's reactions. Indeed, no matter how much he said, everyone was speechless. You can guess that. It was because of the powerful energy emanating from that skull, suppressing all of them. But now that Li Han could move his shoulder joints, he wondered if it was because of the principal, or because he had gradually gotten used to it. The old principal admitted that he was a bit harsh on everyone who had just traveled a long way to get here. Then suddenly his eyes noticed Li Han. He wondered if he could move in such a dense place. Then he opened the big door, telling everyone to look at the door on the left. The other door slowly opened. Inside is a row of long dining tables prepared with sumptuous, neat dishes that look extremely attractive. The old principal told everyone to enjoy the party and relieve all the fatigue from the recent journey. Everyone was happy because they could finally eat delicious food. Only Li Han was a little cautious. Everyone's eyes were glued to the dishes on the table, looking longingly. Slices of white bread spread with butter and cheese. Delicious chicken marinated with oil, butter, spices and flour, cooked with wine to create a premium chicken dish. Scones topped with bechamel sauce. There is also fresh fish grilled on a charcoal stove in European style. Guy Nandu quickly pulled a plate of fish out in front of him, holding a knife and fork in his hand, ready to enjoy and happily invite everyone. But life is not like a dream. He has just touched the fork and knife to the fish. Immediately all the dishes disappeared, making everyone panic. The old man understood that the principal at this time appeared and laughed and mocked them for being idiots. When would they be able to wise up a bit? While Li Han observed the principal, he heard that when he became a lich, he would have to trade a few things. Pretty sure this principal's skeleton is missing quite a few things. His eyes looked more carefully and carefully. The principal produced a pile of tools, food and clothes, telling them that this academy was the birthplace of true magicians, and that the driving force for that development was hunger. The students saw things falling from nowhere like rain, and were startled, not knowing what it was. Yoner caught a cloak, which was their uniform. And Gainando held rice balls and bread, which were their food. Gainando felt that was too much. He shouted to protest, but unexpectedly the principal's eyes suddenly flashed. His reaction was exactly what he had been waiting for. He was extremely certain that they would not be able to swallow this dish, so they had to learn magic, then create their own delicacies. The clothes they wore, the wands they used, common sense has been thrown away a long time ago, so let's learn how to use magic and replace it with things we like. The students' faces turned worse when they heard that. The principal emphasized that they should remember, because this is also the rule that governs this academy. A student blurted out, expressing his doubts, what would happen if they went out and got more things? The principal immediately pointed at him and praised his good question. According to this academy's regulations, first years will not be allowed to leave here. Furthermore, you are not allowed to ask about your seniors. After announcing the rules, the principal immediately asked the students to disperse. Before leaving, he did not forget to wish them luck, go forth and transform themselves into the greatest magicians. Li Han tiredly scratched his forehead. He thought to himself, every world has teachers like this. He's tired of seeing so many of them. He remembered that the professor's face just now, that crazy look in his eyes, was no different from his teacher in his previous life. While Li Han was still engrossed in his thoughts, Gainando suddenly asked if he was also planning to go there. He was extremely dissatisfied that the principal dared to treat them like that. Li Han didn't pay attention to him. He was wondering, what if that skull was kinder than his old teacher? Gainando looked at the poor quality food and clothes in his hands and continued to complain. How could they survive with such terrible things? Li Han didn't think so. He thought that this place not only provided food but also clothes. As expected, they were much better. Gainando's face turned pale. He called his name in confusion. Talking a little about the Wardanas family, they are not very famous among the nobility. Very few people know them, because this family always uses magic research as a curtain to separate themselves from the bustling world outside. That's why, when it comes to them, there's nothing to say other than misunderstandings. Like right now, Gainando looks at Li Han like he's looking at a monster. Even his servant doesn't even have to dress like that. I don't understand what his life is like. Gainando sobbed and cried, telling Li Han to stop by his house if he had the chance. Even though he didn't know what was wrong with him, he still politely thanked him for the invitation. Li Han changed the subject, asking if Gainando would come home with him now. Einrogard Academy accepts anyone to study, regardless of background, as long as they have talent, but to avoid unnecessary conflicts between teenagers, the dormitory has been divided into 4 areas, corresponds to the student's background. The first is the Tower of the Heroic Baek Long, only the noble descendants of Baek Long can enter. This means, only for those with dragon blood. The second is the Tower of the Eternal Fire Phoenix, especially for those who have devoted everything to the sacred fire. It is a holy and pure place, reserved for clergy and apostles. The third is the Tower of the White Tiger God of Lightning, only for those who carry a rage that sweeps away everything. This is the tower where generations of knights reside. They are willing to walk on both paths, knights and magicians. Finally, there is the Tower of the Prophet Wien Vu, the tower for those with endless patience. There are many types of people here. From commoners, servants, actors, beggars, merchants, to low-class nobles. And members of this house are often distinguished by their lowly origin. This is most evident when first entering the academy. However, there are exceptions to everything. For example, right now, 2 students are telling each other to look over there. He only saw Li Han looking intently at them. In his eyes, these students were the most potential business partners. The 2 people he looked at felt that although his eyes looked at them without disdain, they still made them angry. Goosebumps. Actually, Li Han was thinking about how to make friends with them. He thought that no business was rich. The core of business was real combat experience, so he needed to accumulate more. On the other side, there was suddenly a student who looked uncomfortable. He didn't understand why the academy accepted lowly people here. All the students present turned their eyes toward the source of the sound. It was a group of 2 men and a woman. Seeing everyone around them looking at them, the person standing in the middle even smiled and asked him why he said something wrong. Because he dared to insult Li Han's future business partner, he criticized with dissatisfaction. The inferior person here was him. He reminded them that when they stepped in here, they left everything behind. Li Han didn't understand why an arrogant person like him would forget this. He thought to himself, if you dare to insult your partner, you'll let him know. Hearing that, everyone around them immediately agreed. Everyone started talking about him. Some people knew that he belonged to the Wardanas family and praised him for being a great family. The other 3 were shocked by the students' reactions, confused. Li Han felt like the surrounding atmosphere was better, just waiting for him to come over and say hello. But his joy didn't last long. Suddenly 2 people were afraid and told around that the Wardanas family was very dangerous. Don't be foolish to look and come close. Li Han felt embarrassed, hearing rumors about his family, that the head of his family was an entire dragon. Some even said that his family was descended from ancient souls. He didn't understand why they overreacted like that. Yoner even laughed and teased, who said he was so famous. Li Han hesitantly asked her if he looked scary, but she didn't think so. She felt that Li Han looked like a true aristocrat. Until then, he had no idea how famous his family was. Li Han was still thinking about this. On the other side, Gainando waved for them to come back. He was angry that they let the prince out. Yoner immediately smiled and apologized to him. Li Han and Yoner quickly walked past. He suddenly offered to hear everything she was about to say before. She asked again why she pampered him so much. Yoner said it was because of Gainando's mother, making Li Han surprised. She remembered when she was a child, that day someone chased her and told her not to run around while there was a party. Yoner also playfully turned his head and made a devil face at that person. Suddenly she slipped and screamed. The glass of wine she was holding in her hand fell down, and the wine in the glass spilled all over the dress of a noble woman. Noisy discussion rang out. They said it was the queen's outfit. The Macon family was finished. Even if Yoner was a child, it wouldn't be enough, making her scared. But unexpectedly, that woman picked her up and gently told her not to worry. She thinks everyone makes mistakes sometimes, so she only cares if Yoner is okay or not. That tender moment became an indelible mark in her memory. But the truth is, this story didn't happen, Yoner said, and it's because she's super rich. As long as she is friendly with Gainando, she will provide her with a huge amount. Li Han couldn't believe it when he heard it. He thought to himself, if that's true, maybe he should be friends with him right away. The students began to move to the common house. Gainando complained that this place was really big. Li Han also felt the same way. Even though it was called an academy, once inside, there were lakes, forests, and mountains. If you don't understand, why do you have to do it yourself? Suddenly there was a discussion in front. He was sure that the road they were taking led to the Baek Long Tower. Li Han curiously asked Yoner what was going on, but she didn't know. She just remembered that their shared house was in that direction. He wondered why everyone came here. Li Han suddenly opened his eyes wide. He forced his mouth to say something. At this moment, the surrounding students were equally surprised. Everyone looked up at the skyscraping stone building ahead. Gainando couldn't help but feel depressed because the building looked so shabby. He felt dissatisfied because even the servants' living quarters were bigger than here, yet the academy forced him to live here. Li Han looked around. He felt that the building looked a bit cramped compared to the room, people. They moved up the stairs, and Gainando only felt more and more frustrated. Li Han's steps suddenly stopped. Suddenly the surrounding scene changed. He was pulled into a pitch-black space. He looked everywhere. Everyone had disappeared. He didn't understand what was going on or where he was. Suddenly Li Han heard a sound welcoming him and asking where he wanted to go. In the endless darkness, only the front emitted a faint light. Li Han suddenly understood. He understood what was going on. This common house was a magic tower. He secretly praised it for being a magic academy. Then he asked the only light source where he could go. The light source was quite surprising because he adapted quickly. It guides Li Han to the only place he can go. These are private rooms and iron classrooms reserved for first-year students. He asked if that meant he could go to other places in the future. The light source said yes. There are places where he only needs to know the name to be able to enter, and there are also places where he needs to know new information, can come. But right now he can't go in because the principal has banned it, which he understands is strict for no reason at all, so he wants to be taken to a private room. The light source understood what he meant. This time, it welcomed him to his magical apprenticeship. Li Han read a book called A Few Lines About Einrogard. The content in the book says that, except for the main classes that are required to take, you can choose other classes yourself, and you can decide whether to continue taking them or not after a 1-month trial. He noticed a quote, "Magicians are people who explore the principles of the world. Even if others offer to help, magicians still have to walk their own path." Below, named Osu Gon adults. Now he knew that was the principal's name. Closing the book, Li Han suddenly felt that it was not as strict as he thought. Studying here was easier than studying at university. Furthermore, the private room had almost everything he needed. Unfortunately, Li Han was the only one with that thought. When the other students saw the private room, they all screamed because there was nothing. After Li Han understood the rules, he suddenly had the idea to go see what subjects everyone had signed up for. So he moved to the break room and chatted with Yoner. She was excited to learn alchemy. Up until now, she has always been interested in it. Her dream is to build her own workshop and provide items for the royal family. Li Han thinks it seems like a good deal. Yoner's eyes shined. She wanted to invite him to do it together, but alchemy is not an easy job. He needed to think more. The Empire's alchemy industry is highly competitive, from spreading bad rumors about competitors to monopolizing medicinal ingredients. There were even stories of gangs taking profits in the market, so he thought it would be better to choose something stable. Yoner suddenly asked him what topics he liked to study, which startled him. To be honest, Li Han wants to study a subject that has little competition and is easy to get high scores. He prioritized the goal of becoming an official in the imperial court. In other words, as a person working for the imperial government, no matter what field he focused on, grades and ability assessment were still the most important. But when he looked at Yoner's expectant face, he was afraid that if he spoke frankly like that, she would be disappointed. So he casually said that he intended to try out many subjects first before choosing, not to make important decisions like this too hastily. At this moment, Gainando hurriedly ran to inform them that there was a problem, already. He thought his room had been robbed, because it was empty and there was nothing in there. Li Han and Yoner looked at him helplessly. Gainando was confused. He repeated that there was a thief, but the other two still maintained their calm attitude as usual. The next day, Li Han read books to understand the basics of magic. This is one of the main subjects for first-year students, and each house has its own lesson time. He closed the book, but what's with those students wandering around like ghosts in front of them? Yoner complained that they were hungry and moldy. The bed was too uncomfortable so no one could sleep, not to mention the thorny clothes that bothered them. Li Han thought to himself that everything was so difficult, he couldn't help but remember his past life. Someone asked him if he saw it wrong. He still persisted in saying that mealtimes were not included in the schedule. That person gave him a bag of cakes and said that was his daily ration. He could eat any time he wanted. Li Han looked at him murderously, but he had to eat just like him. He consoled him that after they finished work, there was a whole party waiting for him. He joked that if he had to eat noodles again, he would kill him. Unexpectedly, the party waiting for him was not noodles, but cup noodles. He even happily said that he also got a triangular piece of kimbap. Li Han really couldn't say any more. Therefore, he felt that the situation here was indeed much better. The students moved to the front door of a large room. This must be their lecture hall. They pushed the door open and walked in. Some students breathed a sigh of relief because it was on the first floor. The two looked inside, then gasped in surprise. They shouted loudly, even swearing that this was indeed their lecture hall. But inside, a person with blue skin appeared. The corner of the mouth also has fangs sticking out like a wild beast. They called that person an ogre. The ogre smiled warmly and greeted the students. She introduced herself as a professor at the academy and she would teach them. Talking more about ogres, they are ferocious and dangerous monsters to the nobility even though they are very well protected. So the students didn't expect it, but there was a well-dressed ogre standing in their lecture hall. After welcoming the students, the ogre signaled them to feel free to come in and sit. Seeing the students hesitate, she immediately urged them. The lecture hall was quickly filled. Li Han was a little scared and worried when looking at the people in front. To meet you guys, I'm very happy. I'm Garcia Kim, a half-elf, but don't worry, Garcia Kim smiled. Put your hand forward, I don't eat people. She playfully licked her lips with her soft tongue. Suddenly, her eyes became dangerous, her voice lowered slightly, unless you're really hungry. Li Han was worried and restless. He thought to himself, so if the professor is hungry, will he eat us? Next to him, Guy Nandu opened his mouth in surprise. Garcia Kim quickly explained, I feel a bit regretful for joking like that. Anyway, let's start studying. Garcia Kim raised her hand. Something flashed. She said the students here had never used magic, because it was extremely dangerous, so adults were only allowed to use it. Garcia Kim clasped hands. You are all the seeds that create magicians. Reaching iron rank, the lesson teaches you what magic is and helps you see what magic you have. She continued, the journey to becoming a magician is very harsh and I hope I will be your compass. The students were relieved that the professors here were not all like the principal. She picked up the small stick like a chopstick. Okay, now let's start with the most basic thing. What is magic? Adenart raised his hand to speak, which is when a magician uses it to change the outside space according to that person's will. Garcia Kim nodded with a very good answer, but to add more. That is using the power of magic and mana as the main force to change everything outside. Those who have joined this academy have enough talent to sense and detect this magical force. One hand holds a pointing stick, but to use magic one must go further than that. You will have to summon magic yourself and weave it delicately, only then can the magic be cast. Garcia Kim smiled. Usually you think you have to read a spell or take an action to use it, but the most important thing is your will, you must not forget that. She continued, it seems like I've been explaining for a while, why don't we try it ourselves? Please stand up. Now take out your wand and gather magical energy. Li Han picked up the wand and can finally use magic. Instantly, magical energy gathered around the wand. Garcia Kim wants you to visualize the light in your mind while continuing to maintain the current magical energy. Yoner tried his best. It was difficult, so that's what controlling magical energy is all about. Yoner thought of a scene, as if he was trying to hold the reins of a horse that was galloping madly. It would scatter if he lost concentration. Garcia Kim smiled while you were focusing on keeping the magical energy from dispersing and chanting the spell. She raised her wand high and a bright light appeared. She said loudly, "Oh light." The hall suddenly lit up. The students grimaced because of that light. The spell can be anything you can think of at the time, but let's say a short one will make it easier for you to stay focused, right? Li Han thought to himself, I think I have grasped the main problem. The wand flashed. Li Han holds the wand in his hand. Just because he understands the lesson doesn't mean he can do it. Everyone was trying to gather magical energy on their wands. Guy Nandu exclaimed, why is it like this? He grimaced at the magical energy that was spreading on its own. On the other hand, Garcia Kim was calmly gathering magical energy. Suddenly, Guy Nandu's whole body flew into the air. She spoke up, if you can't control it, the magic can become unstable and hurt others, but it's your responsibility as a professor to prevent that, so calm down and practice. Garcia Kim reassured, don't be afraid, if a trick still has magical energy, just try again. The second time, 1/3 of the students gave up, leaving only 2/3 of the students left. Guy Nandu helplessly collapsed face down on the table. Why not? Garcia smiled at them. She whispered, lighting may be the simplest spell, but it often takes months of practice to master. She raised her wand again, then thought, but this is something the students have to overcome on their own, so I won't tell you. Then, she said, okay, let's do it again. The third time, half of the students gave up, leaving only half of the students remaining. The fourth time, most of them gave up, leaving only 3 students. The fifth time, 1 student remained. The sixth time, 1 student remained. The seventh time, a hand raised up to say, forgive me, Professor. Li Han stood up. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I still have to practice. It seems I'm the only one left. His expression looked a bit confused. She just realized, I've done it 7 times already. Usually by the 5th time the first-year students have run out of magic power, no matter how energetic they are. Magical energy. In the East, some tribes call it spiritual energy. A boastful scholar would call it element, and some stubborn priest would call it divine power. The energy that goes with these names is the source of a magician's power. Since every time casting magic requires the use of magical energy, it is natural for a young, inexperienced magician to experience a phenomenon called magical energy deficiency. But his appearance still looked good even though this was the 7th time. Garcia Kim asked him, what's your name? Li Han answered, Li Han, and because he said his first name instead of his last name, it worked. A+ in the professor's eyes because she sees a student practicing equality. She asked, can I come forward? So this girl is Li Han. Garcia put his hand out first and told me, can you give me your hand? Li Han placed his hand on her hand. Suddenly, Garcia was surprised, realizing something. This is it. A blue stream of water appeared around her body. A stream of green water swirled around him. Garcia sank all the way down. Her body suddenly fell into a giant water tank. The teacher's call made Garcia wake up and return to reality. Was it an illusion? Li Han kindly asked her, is there a problem, Professor? Garcia smiled awkwardly. No, it's nothing. Let's continue studying. She panicked, just now. Guy Nandu asked this Yoner, shouldn't we rescue him? What if she eats him? Yoner next to him rested his chin and looked at this idiot. Be quiet for a bit. Garcia put his hand on Li Han's shoulder, then said, come talk to me after today's lesson. He nodded yes. She told everyone, I'm sure you have felt it, but magical energy is very easy to run out. Don't be discouraged. The more you practice, the more magical energy in your body will increase, and you will use less energy. Sometimes a motivated student will lose control during practice and get injured, so we should be very careful. Guy Nandu, he was a bit surprised. Yes. She continued, there's more. I don't eat students. Guy Nandu was confused. I'm sorry. Today we will only learn this much. You guys did a great job. Everyone shouted in unison, thank you Professor for this lesson. And then the lesson ended. In the staff room, a voice rang out, excuse me, Professor. But what's going on? Why did the professor call me out like that? Li Han entered the room and asked Garcia Kim. She looked at him and said, actually, the principal told me about you before today's lesson. She told Li Han. That crazy lich. Li Han was angry. She reassured him not to worry. She said the principal looked a bit silly, but he was a kind person. The students don't know this, but the principal has an extremely good eye for people, and every year he gives out a lot of information about new students. Be careful with that half-beast student. He can burn down the common house several times. My student is a half-demon. Be careful when using holy magic near the girl. And what he said about Li Han was that he has the qualities to be a great idiot. Garcia Kim thought to himself that he said he was a big idiot. You can take it literally, but Eastern people often have a saying. She thought he saw this person's talented qualities. She wondered what kind of student he would be. The teacher has high expectations for Li Han Wardanis. Li Han interrupted her, Professor. She thought to herself that she couldn't tell her about that, but with her mouth she said that was the reason I called you here. You have too much magical energy. Li Han raised his hand to scratch his head. Oh yes, he thought to himself that it was good, but that was why the professor needed to meet with him personally. He thought that practicing would increase his magical energy. Garcia Kim interrupted his younger brother, not just a little better. We cannot even fathom its limits. Li Han was once again surprised. The total energy of a magician is one of the determining factors. If there is a shortage of magical energy, it will be necessary to use magic extractors to be able to possess more energy, which means possessing the more you do, the less likely you will encounter those limitations. In other words, it symbolizes a talented person. Li Han's face suddenly lit up. If what the professor said is true, then the road ahead is full of roses. Garcia exclaimed regretfully. Li-han asked what she meant. She said, "Isn't it good to have a lot of magical energy? That might be true, but you have too much." Then she held up a cup full of water. "Let's compare the magical energy to the water in this cup. This much is easy to regulate, however. To regulate this much total energy, wouldn't it be difficult to do so?" Li-han gasped. That meant the difficulty of controlling magical energy in the main principles of magic will be extremely high. Li-han held his head and struggled. Garcia picked up the bracelet and put it on Li-han's hand. He asked what this was. She explained that a bracelet can absorb magical energy. "It will help you." Li-han smiled happily. "So as long as you have this bracelet, it will be okay. Thank you, Professor." She immediately said, "It was a small problem, so why should I call you up?" Li-han was speechless and didn't know what to say. He asked Garcia Kim for advice, and she leaned forward, thinking it would be helpful to use multiple spells to drain his magical energy. "I was allowed to practice on my own because there would be no risk of running out of magical energy." Li-han smiled and thanked the professor. He didn't need such special treatment. Moving to another scene, Li-han shook his head thinking the future was bleak. Now he had to make sure he got good grades. He wondered whether he should choose a class that didn't use magic or not. He then asked the two if they were thinking about signing up for any classes. Yoner laughed loudly and chose Scholar Kim. She asked if they wanted to study together. Guy Dan No happily refused. "Alchemy is for servants. There is no principle to learn. Yoner is so stupid." Yoner clenched his fist and told Wardanas to move away a bit. She clenched her fists, her veins popping out, making him jerk back. Guy Nandu heard someone calling and quickly turned around. "If you go to the infirmary, never ask for a bottle of medicine." Guy Nandu was suddenly punched and sent flying several meters away. Li-han also knows a little about fighting thanks to the lessons Alralong taught about sword fighting. And that punch was 10 out of 10. Guy Nandu fell face down on the ground and Yoner was happy. Li-han's thumb even raised. On the way to grasp the basics of alchemy, the two were talking about whether it was okay to hit Guy Nandu so hard. She replied that it's okay to apologize tomorrow. Li-han was a bit scared. This probably wasn't the first time she had beaten him. Yoner snorted. "There are so many students coming. There are many students coming from the Black Battery Tower." Li-han didn't care much, but their looks made him afraid. Commoners react in two ways when meeting nobles. One is to fear them, and the other is to not want anything to do with them. Two other students are telling each other not to stare. Wardanas is also here, but the other student is not afraid. So what? In this academy the Wardanas clan can't do anything. Li-han thought that if he appeared too friendly, it could easily backfire. A few minutes later, they were standing together. "Is everyone here?" the professor asked. Li-han thought to himself that with a lich principal and a half-elf professor, another strange professor wouldn't be much more strange. Everyone was curious and chatting in front of that professor. But this is just a short professor. The professor introduced. His name was Uregilm Giamdar, better known as Professor Uregilm. He pointed at the school. "Probably you all were thinking the same thing. We build such a big building. So why are you practicing outside in a yard with no tables?" Adenart raised his hand to say that in order to feel the mana coming from nature, to understand what forces beneficial to alchemists existed in nature. The professor's expression was truly confusing. "No," he protested. Yoner asked Li-han what he thought, but he wasn't sure. He said, "Could it be to collect ingredients?" The professor pointed at Li-han. "That's right." Li-han suddenly sprayed glue on the spot. The professor complimented him that he must be quite a smart ironhead. Adenart was a little embarrassed. Li-han thought to himself that his guess was right. "Don't feel like you have to compete because of this." Yoner is extremely grateful. "The reason for gathering here is so that I can teach you the most important conditions in alchemy." Uregilm was sure that students were thinking that alchemy required someone to be exceptionally intelligent and to control magic with precision. Yoner began diligently taking notes. He continued to say that this was far from reality, the most important ability for alchemists. He suddenly stopped. Then, he raised his voice and emphasized gathering the ingredients. Yoner was scared by this sudden loud sound. Adenart doesn't think so, since they can grow more materials themselves or request it from others, so gathering materials is only a minor skill. There were people around who agreed with her opinion. They also wondered why they had to buy ingredients. Wasn't it a bit strange? Professor Uregilm's face immediately became angry. He mercilessly scolded Adenart for being stubborn, telling her she didn't know anything about the real world, and her expression immediately turned sour. Eurigum went on to say she couldn't even grow 10% of the ingredients she needed herself. Furthermore, the things she bought were useless. The reason they were traveling with the adventurers was because they were digging up valuable herbs in a half-hearted way. He specifically emphasized that half-heartedly. After letting out a long breath, Eurigum stood angrily panting. He quickly regained his composure. After all, as an alchemist, he should know how to collect his own ingredients. If they cannot collect the ingredients themselves, they will not be able to become an alchemist, good at alchemy. Eurigum felt that this explanation was enough, so he threw a piece of paper to the students. On the paper was a drawing of an ingredient. He told them to practice bringing that ingredient here. Einrogard Academy, in addition to its reputation, also has many bad rumors. At this time, Lihan sat on a stone slab. He was reading information about sapweed used to make poison. He didn't know if Yoner had ever worked with it. Yoner of course did it. She used it before registering, and said there was a rumor that people fainted while learning magic. Lihan looked ahead uneasily. It was clear that magic was very dangerous, and accidents could happen. He thought this was a lack of preparation. Why would he bring the students to a place like this? The forest in front of them was deep and deep. Lihan felt that it would be very dangerous if there were only the two of them. Yoner also thought so. She felt that they needed at least 3 people. She asked if there was anyone else at their tower, want to find more allies. Lihan tried asking her if she could see Her Highness the Princess. Yoner was quite curious that he didn't find that serious princess very difficult, but he didn't think this was important. Anyway, they just needed to find the herbs. Lihan suddenly pointed forward. It seemed they were late. Looks like Adenard has finished forming his team. Notably, there were also people from the Black Turtle Tower. Even though she avoided him, he still felt hurt. Yoner was not surprised because Her Highness was famous before she even registered. Adenard was famous even among royal family members for her outstanding intelligence and talent. She had star talent that the public loved, and because of that, people always followed her. Lihan suddenly remembered that Gainando had no one else. Yoner saw that as a matter of course. At this moment, the person whose name was mentioned was sitting alone in the room. He secretly wondered who was saying what about him. Lihan looked at everyone around. The people who had formed teams had all left. Now only the students of the Black Turtle Tower remained. He felt like it was okay if they hated him, because just the two of them were too dangerous. He needed someone who could cover the team's weaknesses. Lihan suddenly noticed something. On a student's belt hangs a moon-shaped badge with 2 cross-shaped arrows. He looked up. It was a person with short hair. The moment that person turned around, he was immediately sure that she was the person he was looking for. Nilia of the Black Turtle Tower. She is a dark demon and a member of Datone, a patrol force in the north. The Datone team is a group of skilled hunters and scouts. They operate in the north and know the topography very well. Mountain. At this moment, Nilia was looking at the drawing in her hand. Then she rolled it up. Even though this was the first time she heard about necrosis, she didn't find it difficult to find it all. Nilia was so confident because this forest was her playground. Although she was also surprised that there were so many skilled first-year students, it didn't matter, because now it was her stage. Suddenly, someone cleared their throat, attracting her attention. Lihan and Yoner greeted her warmly, then the two introduced themselves. Nilia knew Yoner was a noble, but not knowing who Lihan was, she rudely asked them what they wanted. Yoner suggested that they wanted to work together with her to go over the mountain, and when she heard that, she was startled. Nilia looked annoyed and wanted to know what their real purpose was. She clenched her fists, thinking that all nobles were the same. They had insulted her by calling her a barbarian. Even when she showed the most hospitality, they complained that they treated them poorly, so how could these two be an exception? Lihan didn't know that Nilia's heart was stormy. He still tried to convince her that going alone was very dangerous. What should she do if a monster appeared? But Nilia didn't need his help. Lihan immediately asked why. He guessed that she probably didn't think they would use her as bait or throw her away. She was startled when she heard it because she was guessed right in the heart. She stammered and said she just wanted to go on her own. Lihan waved his hand and went into the forest on his own. He was sure that wasn't the reason. Not only did she not know what would happen in the forest, but she also had to collect the ingredients to bring back. He told Yoner that he believed she wouldn't be stupid enough to think she could do it herself, making her blush. Now Nilia just wants him to shut up. It's okay if she agrees to go with them. Lihan immediately smiled and complimented her on her intelligence. He suggested then let's go. Yoner stood silently listening the whole time, just feeling stunned. She didn't know what the Wardenal family taught anymore. A moment later, something passed by as fast as the wind. Then, strong hands grabbed the branch. The owner of those hands is none other than Nilia. Li-han and Yoner looked at her. She was using very fast speed to jump on the tree branches. Yoner exclaimed in admiration that Nilia was truly a skilled hunter. She was curious how he knew so well. Actually, it was because he saw that Nilia's muscles and calves were very developed. Furthermore, she had calluses on her palms, proving that she often used a bow, something only experienced hunters had. Okay. Nilia heard this and immediately stood still. An indescribable feeling suddenly arose in her heart. She wondered if it was just those clues. She felt there was something strange about Li-han. It seemed like he could read other people. But suddenly Li-han said it was just a joke. It was actually because he saw the Detone badge on her belt that he realized that this sudden turn caused Nilia to slip and almost fall. Li-han smiled happily and asked her if she heard. She immediately denied it. Yoner interjected and asked her to go together at the same speed. Nilia shyly wanted to know why. In Li-han's opinion, the only person who can distinguish the herbs here is Yoner. If she collapses, then they have to do it, because what he said was so reasonable that Nilia couldn't refute it. But she did not intend to let him go. She started to change the subject to what role he played. While Yoner searched for herbs, she led the way, and he did nothing. Li-han silently thought that Nilia would be very angry if he said this trip was free, so he decided to say that his role was to protect everyone. When she heard him say that, she looked at him closely and evaluated him. She guessed that based on his toned body, he seemed to come from a knight family, but the thing that made her wonder was why he was in the Blue Tower. Seeing that she misunderstood his origin, he immediately explained that he was from the Wardanis family, not a knight family. He thought about this dark demon girl starting the conversation, so this was a good opportunity to be friends. For some reason, when he introduced himself as being from the Wardanis family, it made her say, "What in such surprise?" She looked at him and then repeated Wardanis as if to confirm. But then it was surprising that she didn't know about his family, but the rest were from the Wardanis family. What was the problem? Li-han looked bewildered and turned to ask Yoner if there was something wrong with his family, only to see her sigh and say that most noble families have bad rumors, but his family was a rather extreme case, making him a little curious and asked about that rumor. She also answered, "That is, the head of the Wardanis family is a dragon. After the zombie rebellion incident, he used his breath to burn all the zombies into dry corpses. The Wardanis family's bloodline made a pact with an ancient spirit, so they received incredible magical abilities at the cost of losing their emotions. That's why the Wardanis family was not merciful. The Wardanis magicians, who came to quell the rebellion, caused a city to disappear." After hearing this rumor, he gently scratched his head in confusion and exclaimed, "Oh my god, that's so scary. Is it the image that if something happens they will become monsters and wipe out everything, ingrained in everyone, right?" According to Yoner, every time a big incident happens, magicians always appear. Why is it only the Wardanis family? It's so unfair. Her friend clapped her hands to comfort him. "You're right, don't think about it, think too much." Nilia smiled slightly. She didn't know anything else. Then, looking at Li-han's current appearance, it seems that the rumor of losing his emotions is probably false. She reminded him to stop whining. They would start walking. He obediently replied, "Yes," and followed. With the skills of a black demon, she will swing through tree branches and serve as a guide for the two of them to follow. Suddenly she stopped as if she had found something. Then jumped down in front of Li-han and Yoner and said, "Wait." She led the two of them through the foliage, showing them the tracks she discovered. From the footprints left on the ground, something very large must have passed here. But because the tracks were quite faint, she speculated that it was controlling its strength to hide its tracks. This aroused the curiosity of a hunter like her about what it would be, what it looked like, what will it be like. Yoner really wasn't interested but wanted to support her, so she showed an expression, "I understand," but this made the black demon friend wonder if she was boasting again. She frowned, adjusted her emotions, reminded herself to start getting used to this, then said, "Nothing," because she knew that no one in the village was interested in these things. Then suddenly there are people who also find it interesting like her. It was Li-han who approached and asked her what she knew about this trace. Making the black demon friend a bit surprised and touched, her cheeks also turned pink. Nilia carefully asked her friend if he really found it interesting, but he asked her again if she thought it was interesting. Her shyness made her speak somewhat flustered, but she couldn't really explain, but then complimented him on coming from a wonderful family. She kept stammering, "So in this wild place," he couldn't fully understand. The question is what she wants to say. Then she stood up and reminded her that it was best to be careful if she saw any traces like this. With her experience, she speculated that this animal not only had extremely large claws, but it was quite difficult to guess what kind of creature it was. She remembered that she had heard about some types of monsters hanging around the area of the Magic Academy, and Yoner had also heard about it. Since Einrogard is a land rich in magical energy, it affects the land and rocks, and many types of monsters appear. Of course, there are also monsters created from experiments, and monsters formed from discarded medicine bottles, taking the shape of special slimes. Hearing the two girls say that made him, I really felt safe. The black demon suggested changing her plan and following these tracks, because, this way, they would be less likely to be ambushed. Suddenly Li Han said he wanted to learn how to read traces, making his friend seem a bit surprised. But then she quickly refused because it wasn't easy and he would probably give up, but he still tried to convince her that as long as she taught him, he would try his best to learn. Hearing Li Han say that, she suddenly stopped moving forward. She smiled excitedly and turned to look at him in agreement to see what he would do. Then the group of three of them continued to follow the traces they discovered. After walking for a while, they finally found the necrosis. Yoner reached out to pick them but felt a bit regretful because she could only find two, but she thought she would quickly find the rest when her two friends suddenly turned around as if they had discovered something. She turned around and suggested to them that she would continue looking because she couldn't see anything else nearby. But for a while, no one spoke up, everyone seemed tense and about to attack something. When she turned to look at the two of them, she couldn't help but be surprised. That was the creature that left behind the huge footprints that they had been following until now. It was a large, ferocious wild boar with two long, sharp fangs, standing in front of the group of three of them. Its size and ferocity made the group of three of them a bit overwhelmed and scared. It growled and advanced, emitting a strange source of energy. Li Han could sense its energy source, so he was sure this was not an ordinary wild boar. Nilia also reminded everyone to be careful, because it was a monster. The monster that was approaching Li Han's group was also in a ready position to attack. He felt it would be dangerous if they kept this up since they didn't have any weapons, then took out his wand from his pocket. He decided to use his wand, because the size of the wand can change based on the owner's will. Suddenly the tiny wand in his hand turned into a huge stick, making the two girls gasp in surprise. Nilia suddenly remembered Li Han's background and thought, that's right, he comes from a family of magicians, come to think of it. The family empire of great magicians, the Wardanas family, so she assumed that he had already learned a few spells before entering the school. Seeing that magical wild boar getting closer and closer, the black demon asked him if he was confident. He was a little confused and said, probably yes. Then she turned with a steady look and reminded him that if he failed, catch its red head and run away, then she would distract it and lead it somewhere else. Making the two of them extremely touched, Yoner was surprised and grateful that Nilia thought so much of them even though they had only met today, making the black demon friend a little embarrassed to explain that it was because among the three of them she is the only one who can do that. When the growling monster stood right behind Li Han, he smiled and thanked his friend for her kindness and asked her to take care of him when things got out of control. Seeing the steadfastness and determination in his eyes made her black demon friend unconsciously call Li Han Wardanas' name in her head, wondering if he was planning to use magic to defeat that wild boar. He tightened his wand in his hand, ready to fight. Li Han suddenly remembered when he was about 10 years old. At that time he was also holding the stick in his hand as tightly as it is now. When kind words of instruction rang out in his ears, the sword could be the king of all weapons, other weapons, but you must not rely on them. You need to learn how to use other weapons to prepare for all possible situations. Only those who understand this process can push mana into their weapons, which is called the state of aura. He looked at his hard-working appearance and sighed with a heavy heart, thinking, he will be disappointed when he learns the truth because only a small number of chosen people can reach this state. After a while of practicing, sweating profusely, he stopped to wipe away his sweat and sighed. Did he have to go to this extent just for aura? He wanted to become a magician and live in an office. So he turned to tell Mr. Alrarlong. He believed that training himself was a way to protect himself, but what he really meant was, so this is enough. When he heard the little master understand things like that, tears filled his eyes. With just this much, he believed that he was definitely different from the nobles who chased wild dreams, but he was even more different from his brother's thoughts, more enthusiastic and determined to teach him everything he knew about aura. Then he made him do the stabbing motion 100 more times, making him confused. Didn't he say that to take a break from practice? It turned out like this. Returning to the present, he raised his wand and aimed at the target in front of him. Then he forcefully used all his strength to put his weapon into the wild boar's mouth. When two girls saw this scene of his, they couldn't believe it, they were really shocked. The monster, receiving that painful blow, trembled in pain, it lost its balance and staggered back. And with a bang it was knocked down by him with a single blow and he fell to the ground unconscious.